Hello. Atheism is binary thinking. You're essentially saying a fixed stance when the truth is, you don't really know. Agnosticism makes a lot more sense. The premise of not adhering to anything because you don't really know. But even from that perspective as well, if you look at the patterns of reality, which is what the empirical method does, help extract patterns that hold consistently true. If you look at that and you say people who believe have more life satisfaction, people who believe are happier during a time when there's an opioid crisis, you realize, even from that stance, leaning towards spirituality, leaning towards God, it makes more sense. Nonetheless, though, atheism is binary thinking. It is not true. Just because you look outside, you feel outside with your five senses, and you see nothing, it doesn't mean anything, really. Because a dog sees more with his nose than we do with ours. We do not see 99.999% of the electromagnetic spectrum. We don't see anything. There's so many forces around us on a consistent basis that we cannot detect at all. There are dimensions strung within ours that are perhaps interacting with us and we don't even realize it. Maybe all of this is just a hologram, as physicists say today, the holographic universe. Who knows what all of this is? It's a confusing, jumbled mess where, as Socrates said, true wisdom is knowing you know nothing, where no one knows anything. And saying you know something despite all of this, saying there is no God. It is binary thinking. You're claiming a maxim that is not true because you're not equipped to see the truth. Agnosticism makes much more sense, and from there, being empirical. Also, more than half of scientists are believers. You can have the empirical method and be a believer of God. Back to the point, having a maxim, having a fixed binary, you're essentially saving mental bandwidth so you no longer have to think about it anymore. You no longer want personal accountability. In essence, believers have harder lives because they're constantly worried about judgment. They're constantly worried about a judge discerning whether or not they will not only go to hell, but give them blessings or not in this life, give them curses or not in this life. It's a worry. And so they live a harder, more prudent life at the benefit of having more life satisfaction, greater happiness during an opioid crisis where people are opping themselves. Atheism is saving mental bandwidth and relinquishing accountability to oneself, doing whatever you want based upon your reasoning, when your reasoning, for the most part, isn't working. Your reasoning doesn't work. Because if it did, if atheism worked, we wouldn't have an opioid crisis, we wouldn't have men fighting women in MMA rings, and that being a metaphor for the bigger picture. We wouldn't have that. The only people standing up against that are Christians, Muslims, and true scientists, because it doesn't make any sense. Courageous, bold scientists. Atheism is anti-science, it's anti-truth, and it exists as a maxim, an egoic maxim to save mental bandwidth and essentially call religious people stupid while relinquishing their own personal accountability. They no longer feel as accountable for their decisions, so they're less productive members of society and they're more miserable. There's no upside to atheism. There's no upside to it. It doesn't make any sense. If you want, you adhere to agnosticism, and from there, you lean towards what makes most sense. People are happier and doing better with religion. It's empirical. Lean towards that. Lean towards spirituality. We need a balm for the existential void propagated by this plane. And God is that balm. He is the one who soothes the soul. And if you don't have that, if you don't believe that, you're going to be miserable. You're going to be in pain. And you're probably going to be doing a lot of things to compensate for that pain, because the human condition is cause and effect. What you feel, you do. A lot of arguments don't happen because of a given subject. It happens because of tone. Because someone talked in the wrong way. Then all of a sudden, all of the bad things, because that emotion come out any way to say anything bad comes up. It's no longer about the actual subject at hand. It's about winning an egoic battle. And that's what emotions do. And so if you don't have good emotions because you haven't been spiritually taking care of yourself, you're probably going to be a worse off person. Not just for society, but also to yourself. The two go hand in hand. If you can do well for yourself, cause and effect, solving problems for others solves problems for yourself. It's a mutual exchange of symbiosis. You're probably going to do better for others as well. Just some food for thought. Atheism doesn't work. It's a binary that saves mental bandwidth because people don't want to think about the bigger picture anymore. They just want to say, there's a lot of evil in the world. Why is that? Maybe because if there wasn't evil, if being good wasn't hard, good wouldn't be as good. Thus, those who are truly good, just, righteous, those who can maintain that in this reality. Have you ever thought about that rationale? Can't be proven. You can't prove he doesn't exist. You just want to save mental bandwidth. But the reality is, again, in believing, you're more likely to mitigate the opioid crisis, contributing your part to it. You're less likely to have existential angst. You're less likely to be depressed in a world devoid of meaning. You're less likely to feel miserable. It is not congruent with the reality. That is nonsense. Atheism is not congruent with reality. Just because you don't see the picture doesn't mean you can fill in a maxim to say it is absolutely, it doesn't make any sense. You can't say a maxim. You can't say a maxim to say this is true and this is not just because I can't see it. A person doesn't live next door because I haven't seen them yet. What if they're just really quiet? What if they're just really good at being inconspicuous? Have you ever thought about that? What if God made the physics because he's a meticulous maestro, a meticulous musician, a scientist who with perfect harmony created these rules? You don't think about these things. You don't want to think about anything. You just don't want personal accountability as an atheist. You just want to be depressed and miserable with short-term gratification, short-term pleasures, with no repercussion. You just want to have low self-control and you just want to be miserable because you're weak. Being religious is hard. It's harder than being an atheist. And you feel better. Your life feels better. The good things are hard. Being a victim is easy. Being empowering is hard. Being evil is easy. Being good is hard. The path is narrow. And for those who are religious, they're playing a very difficult game and getting a better life experience out of it. Atheism, it's not doing that. It's destroying society. Because empowered individuals who walk the line fearing the possible repercussion of their decisions, they're the ones who build a beautiful society. Together. Through love thy neighbor, which they're more likely to do. The world is evil, everything is bad. Everything is awful. The glass is half empty, half full. Meanwhile, religious people are still giving back. Beautifully. Under subservience. To God. Peace.